And I love this voice. I just have to laugh every time I hear it. Okay, so here we got VeraTarman coming up. And oh, I don't get you. Let me see, I need to get you. Here you go. Here you go. And so I'm just gonna give you a little introduction here. Now, VeraTarman has come a couple of times to Iceland, and we've had some great adventures here in Iceland, and it's such an honor for me to present VeraTarman, who is from Toronto, Canada, and has been working in the field of addiction medicine for over 20 years. Receiving her American Board of Addiction Medicine ASM certification in 2004. She's been the medical director of Renaissance, one of Canada's largest residential treatment centers since 2006. She formed there the first inpatient treatment for food addiction in Canada at the Renaissance. And for the past years, she speaks internationally on various issues in addiction medicine, her favorite topic being about food addiction. Dr. Vera is the author of Food Junkies, Recovery from Food Addiction, her second edition from 2019. And I'm happy to say that she's been one of the great supporters of the Impact School and lectures with the school on different subjects. So if you would just unmute yourself, Vera, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Esther, for this invitation to speak at your workshop yet again. I want to say that, like Guntem had to do a 50-hour workshop in 50 minutes, something like that. This is a typically 5-hour workshop that I'm going to squeeze into 50 minutes. But I'm imagining that a lot of you have heard this before, so it's a bit of a synthesis summary. And let's just hope it all works. So I'm going to start with the screen share. There, and let's see if I can do the slideshow. Okay, now Esther, can you just tell me, can you see just the one slide?
Yes, I do.
Okay, okay, because this is a double screen and I just want to make sure you're getting the right screen. And right. Can you see my cursor when I move it?
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect. So then we're good. Okay, so what I'd like to do today is talk about, I don't know if this is, well, first of all, here's my book, just as a little bit of background. I'm an addictions physician, have been working in, I mean, I said 20 years, I don't know, a long time ago. I think it's been longer than that, but food addiction, probably about 15 years now. And on the campaign, like maybe 10 years. So I'm not one of the really staunch pioneers like Phil and a few others who are on, like Teresa. They've been around much longer than me, but we are part of that early pioneering phase. Anyway, this is my book, Food Junkies, that Phil helped me write the first edition of. Then if you want to get more information about the work that I'm doing, I have a Food Junkies podcast along with a couple of people, Clarissa Kennedy and Molly Painshaw. And I have a Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life. I'm sweet enough that I encourage clients and counselors to join. And it is a talking about basically sugar addiction. So people who do flour and grains are invited. So there's a lot of vegans on site. But anyway, enough of that. So I want to talk about the issue of food or basically eating aberrant behavior. And in and amongst that is, of course, food addiction. But as we've already mentioned, and I'm not going to go on about this because I'm preaching to the converted, you know, it's because of this stuff here that it doesn't matter what version you are, whether you're just somebody who comfort eats or you have a binge eating disorder, you have a food addiction. If you're living in this environment, that's exponentiated your problem. And if we could just get rid of this whole thing, which of course we can't, then many of the problems that we deal with with, except for the end people who have progressed beyond a point of basically no return. If we just ate real food, a lot of this problem would be at least diminished to the point of maybe even manageability, but that's not going to happen. So the food industry is a big time problem. And somebody mentioned Robert Lustig's most recent book, Metabolical, which is based on that concept of diabolical, and you are looking at the diabolical right now. But let's look at the problem that the diabolical has caused. And so this is a talk that for the next 15 minutes, a little bit on the synthesis of some of this information. At this level, one size does not fit all. I think it does when we talk about food addiction, which is Gunter's area, where I think that's what he was referring to. But when we talk about just general eating, problematic eating, there are many, many ways to deal with this. And some people can actually moderate, whereas others can't. But those aren't the food addicts. But nevertheless, I think we need to know about these different types, because we're working in a world where there's many people amongst us, and the person next to me may not be suffering from the same level of addiction that I am. Somebody in Esther's class most recently did this wonderful diagram, and she agreed to let me use this. So Phil has this these dimensions, which I think are excellent, and I continually use them as the building blocks of understanding food problems, that we have what are normal eaters that are under the food environment and under our stressful environment and our emotional environment. We end up eating in a way of coping or just as a response to the food. And I call that the hormonal model. I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of these. And then there's, of course, the eating disorders like binge eating disorder and bulimia and anorexia with binge eating components. That is another different fish, but that's there too. And then there's, of course, us, the food addicts. And she did this visual, which I really liked, because what are we talking about in terms of numbers? This was her estimation. But when I saw this, I thought, this is good. This is my sense of it. And I'll bet you, if we get some of our tried and true clinicians like Esther and Teresa, and of course, Phil and whoever else is out there. Whoops, sorry, I don't want us to go here. Can I get back here? Yeah. Okay. I think they probably agree with me. The first thing that I saw was that normal eaters, people who don't struggle at all, look how small that category is. It may well be bigger, who knows, because I only see the people with problems. But I'll bet you that many people who think they're normal actually fit into this model here. Because if we're eating in a abnormal food environment, the toxic industrial food, I don't think anybody truly is a normal eater. And if they are, they're a small handful. So that may well be correct. But this piece here, the hormonal piece, I think is the most common. And this is the group of people that will respond to diets and to the keto plan and to low carb and all that kind of stuff and walk out unscathed and be fine. So those people do exist and they fit into this category. And of course, then there's the emotional eaters and food addicts, which I'll talk about, where these programs don't work, these food plans don't work. And just to show you, this is the bane of the those of us clinicians who want to see food addiction approved in the DSM and other diagnostic groups, how to ferret out the difference and the distinction between food addiction and psychological eating or eating disorder is the bane of our existence. How do we do that? Because it all looks the same and there's so much overlap. Anyway, just to say that, I think most people already know that anyway, but I want to talk now about, just briefly, about the normal eaters, because that is the biggest group and the reason why so many programs do work for some people, and why there may be sort of infighting amongst different Facebook groups and whatnot. I get to eat flour and you can't, and I can eat grains and you can't. And well, why is that? Because we're probably basically dealing on this hormonal level. And I don't need to say, I think I'm probably preaching to the converted, that there is a not only numerical distinction in that many people fit into this category, fewer into the eating disorder, and then a large undisclosed amount in food addiction, because I think there's a lot of overlap and misdiagnosis, but there's also a political and economic and professional boundary arguing, fighting for boundaries and fighting for territory, in that the endocrine or hormonal model is largely the medical model, the surgical model, the pharmaceutical model, and they dominate because they also control the research and they control the funding and insurance. And then second to that is the eating disorder model, which I think is the smallest of the three, but they are the second in terms of controlling resources. If you go to a hospital, you'll find an eating disorder program where you will not find a food addiction program. And I think that this group, the food addiction, is the most ignored in the professional world, but in the world of community of people, it's the one that's been around the longest. Witness OA starting in the 1960s, and lots of people talking about it, but we were not the professionals. So anyway, there's that bit. So I like to show this slide because it shows the distinction between the complexity, first of all, of food satiety and of food cravings, and then food addiction. So the medical model is the blue here. I'm not going to go into the depths of this particular diagram, other than I just want you to note the blue, which is the medical, surgical, pharmaceutical model, research model, and then the red, which is the addiction model. And it is just as powerful and in fact more primitive and more subconscious, I think, just as powerful or even more powerful than the blue, the cognitive and physiological model. It's certainly equal in play, but the blue is the one that, like I said, gets all the attention. And we advocates in the food addiction model are just saying, you must include this. This is the missing piece of the puzzle. And that's, I think, part of the title of this talk, is this missing piece of the puzzle. We need to address this. This isn't the only story by any means, but it is an essential piece that's being missed by clinicians and whatnot. Okay, so the hormonal model, which everybody talks about, is as Gary Tobes has written, as Robert Lustig has talked about, is the sort of prevalent model in society that Jenny Craig and Weight Watchers and the keto movement and the sort of internet flush of diet plans is premised on, which is, well, actually, the keto is not so much, but the idea of calories, however much you eat, and is important, and then however much you expel through exercise. In other words, eat less and exercise more is the key model. And the keto perspective, which is let's get rid of the carbs, which, I mean, they will talk about the essential part of a role of calories not being, well, sorry, that they're not essential. It's the food that you eat, not how much you eat, but they're still focusing on an endocrine model. So I think within the endocrine model, there is a continuum of, like the standard American diet, which I think we all agree is just not healthy in any shape or form. And then the sort of low carb model, which takes out a lot of the problematic foods that drive up the hormones like insulin. But nevertheless, there is still another model that is being missed, and that's the food addiction model. And I prophesize, as I think many have already seen, that even those models, the low carb models, which look really good and have had great success in this first 5 or 10 years, will start to falter as the food industry infiltrates them, just like it's doing with the vegan movement, with their industrial toxic foods and the artificial sweeteners that have already been mentioned. And it's going to cause relapse in that field too. It doesn't need to if we address the food addiction piece. So that's why we remain crucial and important, even in a food plan that looks otherwise healthy, like the low carb plan. I'm a great fan of that plan. And I think that it's the foundation of a food addiction plan. Anyway, the hormonal model is the prevalent medical model, as I said. So doctors and surgeons and pharmaceuticals will be focused on this model. And I'm just showing you the body mass index because the reason why they're interested in the hormones in the first place is because of the obesity crisis. And, you know, here's the BMI, which has basically measured, defined our obesity crisis so that we can say pretty confidently now that 2/3 of the Western population is at least overweight or obese, and possibly even now more, like, in other words, 1/3 is healthy weight. And we can even now, because this slide is actually a few years old, I think we could probably say only 1/4 is of normal weight now, and 3/4 are obese or just overweight. So when we look at this hormonal model, there's a focus on, oh my God, there's an obesity epidemic out there. And then of course the consequences of that, which are all of these conditions. So doctors are mainly interested in the obesity crisis, the hormonal medications and surgery, whatnot, because we want to treat all these conditions, which are the results of all this. I'm just showing you this to show you that this is the bread and butter of bariatric medicine, of family medicine, of bariatric surgery, of just medicine. And, you know, I think we all know this. If we just took out the sugar and the sugar like products like flour, many of these conditions would be removed. As we've heard Mary, the previous speaker, speak, that a lot of the conditions that she had got better, whether they be physical or mental. That would be the simple solution. Although typically with the medical model, it is looking and treating the symptoms rather than the cause. So just gonna move on from there. The hormonal model, if we try to understand food satiety, this is my favorite slide where I look at the two models. I'm not going to talk much about eating disorder because it's its own, it's important because it is often overlapping with these, but I actually think it's not that high a number, and that many people develop eating disorder-like behavior that is actually truly food addiction. And I also say, I don't really want to talk that much about it because it has such a dominant place in the psychological literature for food aberration, and we need to get our space to food addiction. But anyway, it fits in there in a jumble, as I said. It's when you have the patient presenting to you initially, it's all a muddle and we have to untangle it. But so the first piece is we can assume that there is going to be some hormonal aspect, and then yes, also some eating disorder aspect, but let's look at the hormonal piece. So when we try to understand food and satiety, we need to look at the hormones. And the two hormones that are most important initially is the ghrelin and the leptin, or ghrelin and leptin. And I'm just going to jump to this slide here. Ghrelin is the hormone that is released when the stomach is emptying. So it tells me that I'm hungry. That's its key role. And when the stomach is filling up because I'm eating, because I'm hungry, then it is reduced. And so the hunger cues are less. And leptin is the, they kind of work hand in hand. So you can see here, when I'm hungry, my appetite increases. And then as I eat, my appetite gets less, and leptin kicks in 20 minutes after I've eaten. So they kind of work hand in hand. Ghrelin is up, leptin is down. And then as I eat, the ghrelin goes down and the leptin goes up, which tells me you're full. So it's a nice system, and it works really well under the Tony Vasello has this wonderful phrase that he calls just eat real foods, which is basically what I think we all believe in. If we just ate real food, that sync between leptin and ghrelin works perfect. And I always like to use the example of the Brussels sprouts at a restaurant. You know, if I go and eat them, I'm really hungry and they're delicious at first, but after a plate and a half, I don't want any more and I'm full. And if somebody said had more, I'll say I'm full. And that's the ghrelin that tells me that those Brussels sprouts are delicious at the beginning, and at the end, no matter how delicious they were, I'm full. And that system works perfectly when it's Brussels sprouts. But when you make them caramelized with sugar and add in a little bit of chocolate that exists, chocolate Brussels sprouts, then I suddenly have more hunger, and this system no longer is enough, because I may still be full, but my desire to eat is more in the hungry part. And that's partly because of insulin, and also partly because of dopamine. which I'll get to in a minute. But so this ghrelin leptin, nice connection that works well under a real food environment, would give us a hunger of no more than 3. So here's the scale that I like to use, the hunger scale of the starving. I'm so hungry, I will eat no matter what, even my own food that's not my own food, even the stuff that's in the garbage, I'll eat whatever it is, all the way to I will eat to the point where I am so sick, but I'm still eating because I still feel like I want it. That is not a good place to be. But the ghrelin and leptin, which is, as I said, that perfect balance, this is what we call in the addiction world, food sobriety, food serenity. That's sort of between a 3 and a 7. So we get hungry, those of us who eat well, but it's an appropriate hunger. It's not that starving, crazy hunger. And we eat till we're full, and we're encouraged to eat until we're full, but not stuffed. Oops, sorry, I should say full. So 3 to 7 is food sobriety, food serenity. And if somebody is starving themselves to the point where they're extremely hungry, or extremely hungry after an hour and a half of eating a meal, something's wrong. And that wrong is most likely due to, I'm going to go back here to insulin. So ghrelin, leptin, the perfect system under a perfect food environment. Enter the food industry, which will make us, first of all, want food, which is, that sense of craving, which is all about dopamine. I'll get to that in a little while. Insulin is the first thing. If we're still looking at just the hormonal model, if I'm eating food that has a lot of sugar in it, insulin is the hormone, just like leptin and ghrelin, they're all hormones. This is the hormone that regulates sugar. It takes the sugar from the blood into the body, into the cells. And I need more insulin when I'm eating more sugar. And as I'm eating more, or even anticipating more, my insulin will go up. And insulin is a hunger hormone, because when my insulin is up, if there's no food in my body, then the insulin will take out whatever sugar there is, including the amount that I need to sort of get through the next 3 or 4 hours until my next meal. And I'm going to start running out, or my sugar will drop and drop and drop. We call that hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar, which leads to the starving sensation. So when you're starving, you probably have more insulin than you have food, which is what happens when you eat, and then the sugar goes up and then it goes down quickly because the insulin is getting rid of it. And then you're starving, so you eat more and you're going up and down and up and down. Eventually, the insulin, when there's massive amounts of it, because of the massive amounts of sugar that we can eat in our processed food, we become what's called insulin resistant, so that the sugar is in the blood, supposed to, because sugar is fuel for the brain. And if the glucose sugar does not go into the cells, then I can have as much as I want in the blood, but if it's not going into the cells, I will become hypoglycemic. It's the irony of living empty in the midst of plenty, too much. So essentially we become insulin resistant. The insulin no longer works because it's so much that the body has essentially become tolerant to it and is no longer listening to the cues. So then you add in more insulin. It's just like addiction. You just add in more, you need more to get the same. And then when you stop using it, you become tolerant and dependent. So it's insulin and dopamine actually are very similar in action in that respect. But anyway, so that's when you have an insulin aberration, which is what I'm describing now, you have that crazy starving hunger, which looks like food addiction, but it may not be. So if you then go to the food plans like the keto plan, which says insulin is created because of the carbohydrates that we eat, and the refined, toxic food environment, insulin is super high. If you just don't eat that stuff and just eat meats and fats, there's no call for insulin, and you can regulate this to getting back to ghrelin and leptin, which is what happens, and that's why it's so successful initially. I make the argument that you don't have to go as far as keto. You just have to do low carb or low refined carb. That's the key piece. So that the foods that you're eating, the Brussels sprouts and basically the complex carbs, are broken down in a slow, even manner over a course of hours. That will be sufficient to get you back to that perfect sync where the ghrelin and leptin takes over, because the insulin is only supposed to be a backup. And it's a backup when the fuel is down, or I guess the fuel is up too high. So that's the hormonal model here. and how that works and how it can get messed up. It's the insulin that gets messed up, and it's thanks to the food environment. Robert Lustig, in his wonderful book, and he'll talk about this later today, talks about the metabolic, the book is called Metabolical, and he then talks about all the evils of insulin beyond just this aberrant food. I'm just talking about the aberrant food and how it looks like food addiction, but in fact, he's going to talk about the whole medical consequences beyond that. And, you know, more and more doctors are saying it's actually not the sugar that's causing the grief of diabetes and obesity, which is just another symptom, and other conditions like fatty liver, et cetera. It's the insulin. So I'm going to let him talk about that more because he does it much better than I do. But I'm just saying it is the problem for that food addictive like behavior when you're actually maybe not a food addict. So one size does not fit all. In this case, you may have to find out what your particular tolerance level is to some degree to sugars, and you may actually be able to tolerate or moderate a certain amount if you haven't damaged your pathways too much. But this is not food addiction, although food addicts are also succumbing to this. So that's the hormonal model, and I'm actually doing pretty good with time here. Then the next model, which we want to introduce, is the food addiction model, and this is not instead of, this is on top of, because as I said, we are at whim to this too. The dopamine, serotonin, and endorphin complex is part of the food addiction model, and I'm just going to jump ahead to the missing link. Again, what we're talking about is the food addiction model here, and there's my slides again. Good, so I can go back. So the food addiction model is in this middle part of the brain here. This is our primitive instinct. I want you to remember that word instinct, motivational, emotional part of us, emotional comfort or seeking comfort part of our brain. The insulin and the hormonal model is also physiological. They're both physiological, but it's operating on a different plan. This is the instinctual hormonal, instinctual emotional model, motivational model. And it is here for us to feel good so that we, when we do things that support survival. And because sugar and fat are both energy dense, we are wired and primed just by being born. This is not like some people have a sweet tooth and others don't. We all, to some degree, have a sweet tooth because sweet and fat are energy dense, and that keeps us alive. So that feast or famine, and also the fact that there's no switch to stop. If there's a lot of food, you know, we'll eat. We'll just eat and eat and eat and eat. Like that feast or famine thing fits into the brain that we have that I think still belongs to the hunting gathering part of us, which is why the paleo diet works just as well as the keto. It's basically, like I said, we're living in a food environment that's toxic. If we were living in the real food environment, this would be perfect because we would get most of our carbs in the summer, you know, with even pre-agricultural, but, you know, before that, there were still apples growing on trees and, you know, wheat grasses somewhere, I don't know. There were still some carbs that were eaten, but there wasn't very many. It was essentially a low carb food plan. And that amount of sugar that we could eat in the package that nature provided it would not overwhelm this, but just entice us to eat it. Of course, now we're living in an environment where it just blows this out of existence, just like any other drug blows out of existence. I mean, sex is also natural, but pornography is not, and having multiple partners in a day is not, except maybe sometime during wartime or something like that. You know, I'm talking about in historical times, but for the most part, it's you know, nature has a sort of its own sort of guardrails that make us so that we don't go crazy. But if those guardrails don't exist, which is what's happening with the food environment, then we're in trouble, which is what we are. So we want to put in our own guardrails, which we then call the low carb diet or the food addiction diet or whatever. They're just guardrails so that we can eat the food that our brain was designed to eat. It's not even disease. This is just how our brain was designed to eat. Although you can become diseased, and then you have to be super careful, like in the context of weighing and measuring and eating even fewer carbs or whatever. But anyway, we've got this reward pathway here, which makes us be enticed to eat sugar and fats. The backstory behind that is in that kernel of the brain of the reward pathway, we have the nucleus accumbens, which is our essentially pleasure button. And next to that, we have the amygdala, which is our panic button. And they're both sort of communicating together to make us be sure that we do things that are good for us and avoid things that are bad for us. And dopamine is the neurochemical that I'm just gonna, I guess so, that makes us want things. So it's the neurochemical, the excitement of desire, of motivation. I don't have the thing yet, but I'm motivated to do what I have to do to get it. So it's the wish, it's the I want. And that is the sort of mother of neurochemicals for the study of addiction, because addiction is all about I want, the wants, which is not broken, it is broken. Even though I have a plate of food in front of me, I'm still thinking about the next plate. I'm not even tasting this plate because I'm thinking about the next one. Serotonin is the neurochemical, also part of this reward pathway, that is the satisfaction. I have a plate of food, the Brussels sprouts, and boy, were they ever delicious. And I've got a couple more bites. I'm going to enjoy those, and then I'm done. There. I mean, that's the, you know, it's like ghrelin and leptin work together, and dopamine and serotonin work together. So I want something, I get it, I feel a sense of having it, and I'm good. What happens with addiction is the want gets skyrocketed out, so that even though I feel like I have, and please, I don't want any more, really, I still want more. It's like this huge itch. Whoops, sorry about that. And then the other neurochemical that fits into this picture is the endorphin, which is the neurochemical of comfort, of numbness, of the pain is there, but it doesn't matter. The distance, there's many different ways of saying it. It's not a sense of satisfaction. It's a sense of being removed and safe in a different way. All of those work well in the context of food. I'm just going to show you this slide here. If I want to get an excess amount of dopamine, there it is, sugar, white starches, in other words, on the glycemic index, starches that become sugars very quickly. I had a slide earlier on with the Unwins that did a really nice showing of how even things that look safe have, that are starches are basically just a lot of sugar linked together. So if you are eating too much of that stuff, or you're already too sensitized to it, you have to avoid it. Anyway, that's here. The serotonin is the sense of when you can't sleep at night, you don't want to eat more sugar. That's just going to keep you awake. But, you know, the theory is have potatoes, you know, the book Potatoes, Not Prozac, you know, Prozac being a serotonin-based drug. Pasta, basically another serotonin-based drug. And turkey, same thing. Bananas, same thing. They heighten the serotonin. You're not going to become addicted to them unless you eat a lot of them, but they do have that effect. An endorphin, you can get an endorphin high with wheat, with dairy, with spices, with sugar. Sugar, of course, and notice sugars in all of them. Actually, it should be in the second one as well. Chocolate, all of these. Now, let me see. If I want to look in my drug addiction literature, I'll see that dopamine, cocaine enhances that very nicely, alcohol enhances that, and sugar enhances that. And serotonin, similarly, alcohol will give me that. That's the you know, social lubricant of having a few drinks. You know, I'm not so shy with people, that sort of thing. And sugar too. If you, I've been in parties where it doesn't really unthaw, especially if it's a party with no booze, until the desserts come out, and then people are like super excited to talk to each other. It is a social lubricant. And endorphins too. Just witness, have you ever had it where you're feeling super down, and you know, so you have a couple drinks to feel better, or you eat something and you feel better? I mean, that's the endorphin effect. It's a calm, balming, soothing effect. Sugar does all of those, as does alcohol. And I am the first to say that, like Robert Lustig, I loved it when he said that sugar was the alcohol for the youth, like babies, and it is slow-mo alcohol as far as I'm concerned. He talks about how it's slow-mo alcohol in terms of the physiological health effects, but also mental. And I'm not going to talk more about it, but just to end on this piece by saying that sugar is definitely a gateway drug for kids, so that they can then start drinking alcohol and then potentially use other drugs too. Like it's all the same neurochemistry. It's just how quickly and how fast it gets to the brain. So that's the neurochemical piece, and how that fits with, here we go, how that fits with addiction. I want to get back to this here. When I'm eating normal food, the ghrelin, there's a natural connection to giving an increase of dopamine. So that as I'm starting to get hungry, I'm starting to think and get excited about food. As I'm eating the Brussels sprouts and I'm getting full, the leptin kicks in and says, you're not full anymore. And it actually suppresses the dopamine so that I'm not anticipating the next plate of Brussels sprouts. So this works hand in hand to make the system, this hormonal system here, work well. In an addiction world, if I'm already super kindled, super, this is already not working well. This is that concept of I have one and now I want more. It's not possible to just have a little bit, because what's happened is it's kind of, well, it's a kindling effect. It's like a seizure. Once you have a seizure, you're more likely to have another seizure. The brain has adapted itself in such a way that it's not a normal response. So a little bit of something will make me want more, because the dopamine is enhanced. And when I want more, that's because dopamine is high. Just equate, dopamine means want. So I want more, it means there's more dopamine. This is a slide I like to show my people in addiction, where I say we have a baseline dopamine of around 100, and I am motivated to collect food and cook it and do all the trouble of shopping and preparing because I'm going to get an extra boost of dopamine. That's through my Brussels sprouts. And similarly with sex, why would I bother going to all the trouble of everything that it takes to get this unless I get a boost of some sort? But these are life-sustaining or species-sustaining activities. So nature has given me this bonus of 150 to 200, and that's normal life. Brain can handle that. The occasional peak or spiritual experience that we have, the occasional, I want to write occasional here, might dip you into a 2 or 3 or even a 400, but that's not very often, and the brain can withstand that assault of dopamine. But if I take a drug and regularly give myself the extraordinary or supernatural experience of being with dopamine, refined sugars, cocaine, crystal meth, I'm basically, that this is not sustainable and the brain will change. And part of that is that kindling that I've talked about. So refined sugar, I'm putting into the same category as alcohol. It just takes longer, but it's in the same category as with opiates and with cigarettes. And in fact, sugar addiction and nicotine addiction have been compared in terms of how long withdrawal lasts, what the withdrawal is like, and how ubiquitous and hard it is to quit because it's so under the radar. Cocaine is a little bit more, and crystal meth is more. So these are the more dramatic addictions. But you know, alcohol and sugar, it'll kill you, just not as quickly. But there's the dopamine. And when you've got dopamine that's more than 200, 300, 400, 600, the brain starts to adapt because it doesn't want that. It's an assault. It's literally an assault. It's a toxin. Crystal meth is a neurotoxic drug because it's too much dopamine, and it basically burns out the receptors. We become dopamine resistant, just like we become insulin resistant for diabetes. It's addiction is kind of like a diabetes of want, if you want to use that kind of analogy. Okay, so when that happens, we develop a tolerance, and then this concept of addiction starts to appear. And if it's been refined sugar instead of alcohol, then it's called sugar addiction. These neuroadaptations occur, and one way to view sugar addiction, food addiction, is that we start with, you know, that 0 to 200, which is, and then I have 200 because it's peaches or bananas instead of the usual Brussels sprouts, I'm still safe. There's not a lot of neuroadaptation that happens. But if I have a few too many, or I find a way to get honey, or it's the summertime and I'm eating a lot more fruit, there's a certain amount of neuroadaptation, but not necessarily dangerous. But then we move into, you know, that 200 or 300 more often. And then neuroadaptations start to change. And then ultimately we get to a fixed change state, which is that concept of once you're an addict, there's no going back. There may still be some going back here. And this is where, you know, the hormonal model and people with eating disorders may live in this realm. And in fact, there is a, I'm going to just jump ahead to the picture of, here we go again, that some people have postulated that this distinction that Phil has so nicely distinguished between normal eaters and eating disorder and food addiction may all be one continuum, where it's just a gradual spectrum of compulsion and severity of dopamine. So that the passive overeating or comfort eating is part of that hormonal model. And then if you start to do compulsive and binge eating, you're starting to look like you're having an eating disorder. And then ultimately it's all of the below with the final end product, which is food addiction. And I am of the belief, as probably Esther and others are, that if we continue to live in this food environment that we do and not resist, we're going to all be food addicts at some point. Yes, there's a genetic predisposition to getting there sooner, one person than another, but unless we change our food, which thankfully we're seeing, like with the keto and whatnot, we're all going to be food addicts. That's my thing. So for those people where the neuroadaptation has happened, in other words, we've become food addicts, Phil has also done a nice distinguishing a piece about is there, you know, early and middle and late stages. And if you follow this idea that it is actually a continuum, a gradual continuum, you could see that this part here is the early stage and the middle phase and the late phase. I think it works nicely. We can just look at that. So, you know, these are the people who realize that they're having problems, they're trying to stop it, and maybe are able to for some period of time. But if they continue to eat that food, which is of course what they will do, because in the hormonal model, or basically the medical treatment of diabetes, basically insulin-based conditions, or eating disorder conditions, we all preach moderation. So they're inevitably going to move into this phase here, which is where the domination, the dopamine resistance gets more and more, and until here, it's all about, I mean, we need to live. I mean, this is somebody who's severely depressed, needs to eat to feel anything, let alone to feel good, and then has all of the addictive behavior, which fits with the dopamine. How do we treat this medically? This is a model that is supposed to be from surgery to the least to the diet and physical activity the most. This is the, you know, calories in and the calories out model that has not been very successful. Of course not, because we know that they've not been using food addiction. So it's been kind of almost thrown out by the medical community. It doesn't work anyway. Let's just get with the program, which does work, which are the meds and the surgery. And I just want to say quickly, in the 5 minutes I have left, that it doesn't work that well either. It's something, it works, actually, it does work temporarily. So we've got surgery, which can, you know, if you're 300 pounds, you can lose 150, well, yeah, 150, you can lose quite a lot of weight, but will you keep that off? By 5 years, usually about at least a third to a half is back. And of course, for some people, even more. The surgery is essentially, its focus is to limit the amount that you can actually eat, like you just make the stomach so small you can't fit that much food in. And then of course you're going to fit in syrupy, fatty foods. So then there's more extreme surgery where they limit the absorption of the food. You know, that leads to all sorts of other dangers. It is a solution, but why would you do something this drastic unless you also start eating food that won't make you gain weight again. I mean, I find that the most painful thing of all. You've done such a drastic thing, but you're still eating the foods that are going to make you gain weight. And now you've got a, you know, a stomach that is not up to par, and you're still gaining a lot of weight. So anyway, it's unfortunately considered a still in 2021 first line therapy, but it's so expensive, so it's not actually used. Surgeons are constantly bemoaning, saying we need more, we need more surgeons, we need more or whatever. So then there's the medication piece. Where did I get to that? Sorry, I want to get to the meds. Well, I guess that's in another section. I'm sorry. I'm gonna move. Yeah, here. Meds are the next sort of area, and if you're in the bariatric world, you're not a bariatric surgeon, you're a bariatric clinician, you're looking at the meds. And I do have a whole hour to talk about with this, which I'm not going to do. I'm just going to say I've oranged out the drugs that are mainly used today. They've all been used in the past. Vyvanse is an amphetamine-based drug that is used for binge eating disorder, because the medical world doesn't believe in food addiction for the most part. So they're thinking, if you've got a problem with food and it's can't be dealt with in some of these other drugs, then it's probably that you have a food eating disorder, and Vyvanse is the key drug for eating disorders. It's supposed to remove the impulsivity, not the compulsivity, the impulsivity of eating. I think personally, the reason why it works is because it's an appetite suppressant, and therefore not that much different than our diet pills of the 60s and 70s. And many of you here who have had a history of controlling your food have probably gone through this phase. I don't think it's a good solution. Any of these drugs, once you stop using them, the effect stops working. Saxenda is another drug that's probably the most popular right now. It's a hormonal-based drug that alters the insulin and sugar profile, so that it's actually another name for it is it's actually a diabetic medication. It's used to control diabetes, an oral medication. But in the Saxenda version, it's meant to be for weight loss. And what it does is it alters that hormonal insulin profile. How much does it work? 20% of weight at best is lost. So I guess if you're 300 pounds, 20% of that is what, 60 pounds, maybe? I think that's actually very optimistic. Anyway, stops working once you stop using it. Very expensive. It's injections. Personally, I would rather, this is my opinion, it's not just my opinion, let's just quit the damn sugar. It works just as well. There's another drug called Contrave. It's the closest one to being an addiction drug, an anti-addiction drug. And it is an antidepressant and naltrexone, which is an anti-craving drug, mixed together. So the idea being that if you can, buprenorphine, which is also Wellbutrin, has a weight state, it's of the antidepressants, it doesn't make you gain weight. In fact, it might even help you lose weight a little bit, and naltrexone takes away the craving. So that's the theory behind that. Does it work that well? Again, 20%, and I'm being optimistic. Those of us who have been not eating sugar for years will say that some of us have lost 50% of our weight or even more and kept it off. I guess if you start eating sugar, you'll gain it back again. But I think that we have much greater success rates than these guys. But anyway, this is the medication, and I'm just showing you that here they are. Topiramate is an anti-seizure medication that, for reasons that we don't understand, has a weight sparing, maybe even weight losing effect. And so people are prescribed it. So the surgery and the meds are basically what the medical establishment uses. So now just to sort of summarize here, in the early stage, you see here early to mid stage, you may be just dealing with a hormonal disturbance. And so Weight Watchers, keto, plant-based calorie restriction may work. In other words, moderation may work. If you're a budding food addict, it won't work. And if you found that these things don't work, it's probably because that piece is there. Food addiction is a chronic progressive condition. If you are a food addict, these may have worked initially, but they will stop working because the dopamine is getting more and more sensitized. And here's early to mid stage psychological things like mindful eating, intuitive eating. These will all work maybe for the binge eater or the eating disorder and the hormonal model, and they might work for early stages of food addiction. However, as we move along and finally identify that this is the culprit that is causing the damage to the dopamine, and along with that sugar, we've got to stop that so that we don't continue more damage. And so, you know, a person at end stage of food addiction is somebody who can't eat sugar, they can't eat flours, they probably can't even eat grains or sweeteners which promise sugar or dairy or nuts. They can't even assess their volume, like Mary was talking about in her story. She would be a classic example of an end stage food addict. And so there is no way moderation would work for somebody in that circumstance, because that dopamine system has been so damaged that we're basically looking at somebody who is a food addict in remission as long as that food is contained and even weighed and measured because of the volume. That's end stage food addiction. So in summary, this is another talk, intermittent fasting. In summary then, the one size fits all basically abstinence if you're a food addict. Otherwise, if you're just talking general food aberration, these tools like psychological tools might work, moderation might work. But if you're a food addict, the only thing that works is identifying what is the trigger that gets that dopamine, because that's the definition of dopamine, is dopamine impairment. What is the definition of dopamine? What's the trigger for dopamine? Stopping that, which might include all of these things. And then, of course, this is where Gunter comes in. How do we sustain that for life now? So that's the addiction recovery tools and onwards. And I think, Esther, I've done that in the time allotted to me. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Yes, thank you, VeraTarman. You're a marathon. Your mouth is a marathon.
I know, probably too fast for everybody. I'm sorry.
No, it is just amazing how your clarity comes across, and you know, even my foggy brain sometimes, you know, understands as you go through this for sure. So for now, we do have a few questions and some chats in the chat window. So I'm just going to go in there. One is actually asking probably from earlier talk with Mary, if stevia is a sugar. And Teresa Wright is on as an attendee, and she said, like, she has not come across any sweeteners that does not have sugar, some kind of a sugar in it. What would your response be?
I actually, that's news to me. I don't know about that, but I consider sweeteners, including stevia, as being in that gray area. It's definitely a trigger foods for end stage food addict, but might not be at early days. I would use it as a harm reduction to get you off the sugar if you need that, if that's the thing that's going to sustain you. We used to think that stevia and artificial sweeteners in general were hormone safe, like in other words, they didn't spike insulin and cause cravings from that point of view, or even health consequences. But now we're even questioning that. We're questioning that there is actually an insulin spike. So we're not even sure that that's safe. But my general line on this one is, use it very carefully as a bridge and get off of it as soon as you can, because if nothing else, it'll perpetuate cravings and weight stall.
Thank you.
So stevia is not a sugar, but it has a sweetener effect, just like some of the others. Yeah, it's considered the safest one of the bunch, but it's still not necessarily.
Here's an addition to this from Teresa Wright. Stevia is not sugar, but the packets often have sugar dextrose in them.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Very true. Yeah, very true. Yeah. Okay, so then there is a question here. If, asking for the slides, and thank you for the information, the breakdown of the chemical, hormonal, and medical connection is so helpful. I don't know what, I don't think you're going to give out the slides. Where are you? What do you think?
I don't know if unless you talk me into it, the slides are usually for your course.
Yes.
And whoever's interested, take Esther's course, because you'll get the longer version of this and many other things. I mean, this is really like a sort of teaser, right?
Yes.
Of
Right.
the whole food addiction field. Yeah.
Right. Let's keep it at that, and we'll have to kind of see about the slides as we talk about that. So
Okay.
here is some of the chats. Just a thank you. And so it's not really a lot of questions for Vera here, I see right now. So there's still a little bit of time if you have a burning desire to ask something for our.
I can go over. I mean, I went over stuff so quickly. It's probably
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
tidal wave.
Yeah. So one is actually asking, please explain if artificial sweetness raise insulin level. Oh, you just kind of answered that before, I think.
Yeah, I don't think I can say more than that, because I think that it's fairly new and I don't have that research right in front of me, but I know that it's being questioned, as it was for the longest time, this belief that it's okay to do that. But my clinical experience has been that it's not that okay. It still promotes cravings, just like dairy does. It still promotes cravings, even though it should be okay. I mean, I know there's sugar in it, but it's.
Yeah. Absolutely. And let me see. So there's two here, 2 or 3. So without cravings, recovery is much simpler and provides freedom. See, Gray Sheeters Anonymous, 12 and 12. This is from Cynthia, I guess. Thank you, Cynthia. And so from Tony, would there be some overlap from normal eater to the 3 other sections on that circle graph?
Yeah, well, yes, I think so. I think that those normal eaters, they must be hardy genes or something, but I really think that if they're continually exposed to this food, which is getting more and more toxic and more potent and more available, I don't see how even the normal eaters will be able to withstand the onslaught, because we've got I mean, if you're constantly eating sugar, you're going to become diabetic. Like some people, you see the person who's 120 who says, I'm 120 because I still smoke and eat crap and drink. But they're the unusual case. Most of the time, people cannot tolerate this ongoing. So we start off normal, but some of us have a predisposition, genetic or cultural or even ethnic predisposition to becoming diabetic more quickly or becoming an addict more quickly. But I think everyone will if we continue to be in this environment.
Absolutely. So now the questions are really coming in here. So Cynthia's asking if you could talk about dairy and just and caffeine. Does caffeine fit on the spectrum? And then one is, so it is your opinion that food addiction is spectrum disorder like drug and alcohol addiction, from Joseph?
Yeah, I'm of that belief. I know that some people might make the argument that they're distinct entities, and they could be distinct entities, but over time, I think they do blend and blur into each other, which makes it such a muddle. And it's why I think that having a food addiction diet is a first place to go. There's nothing that we're doing that's bad. It's all eating good food. We're not talking about restricting so that the person is starving. We're just asking them to eat good, healthy food. And then over time, if the person wants to, they can then introduce what are potential triggers for somebody else and see if they can withstand that. But they have to, and I think it was, I don't know if it was Gunter, somebody mentioned that it's really important that you don't do this alone. You have to have a coach, somebody else who recognizes the denial and the lies that we tell each other to make sure that we're okay. The question about dairy, that's another one of those gray area ones, because the casomorphine that's in dairy and the sugar is, it's an opiate / dopamine enhancement. it may be okay for many people, but depending on how battered the system is, how fragile, I like to see it as a fragility, so that we finally find a sweet spot, literally sweet spot, that changes. Like, so what I can eat now, I may not be able to eat in 5 or 10 years from now, because things change, they become more fragile or whatnot. And so that dairy is something that you might get away with, and then later find, oh, I can't do this anymore, because there's just too much of the casomorphine. It's like I could not withstand that anymore. My experience has been that people who have been around for a long time eventually knock it off their system, their food plan.
Okay, so there's just for the last minute or two we have here in the chat, Vera's book explains, have all the information. Somebody is talking about your book. Somebody is asking if they if your book explains the materials you're presenting here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does. And so does the Food Junkies podcast. We actually go to the people that were, like Robert Lustig and Nicole Lavina and others. We actually go and speak to them and get them to talk more about that stuff. And there's a question there about the Renaissance program. So I was part of the Renaissance food addiction program, but COVID has kind of quashed that. And my fear is that might be the end of it. I don't know. But to right now, I'm not aware of a in-house long-term food addiction program other than maybe Marty's, and that's within the context of an eating disorder program. They're mainly outpatient or 5-day workshops. And if anybody wants a listing of resources, I don't know if Esther, if you have it, but I do have it written up, and it's on my website as well.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Vera, so much. Always a pleasure to have you with us. And I'm sure people were impressed as I was and continue to be. And now we're needing to say goodbye to you and to say hi and hello to Dr. Robert Lustig. He's coming in. There he is.
Hi, Esther. Hi, Vera. How are you?
Hi. Yeah, you're the best.
I don't know about that.
Thank you.
Talk to my wife.
So right now I'm going to turn this recording off and say